Hey, Vince, thanks for having me, man. Very excited to be here. We're really, really glad to be chatting with my brother from Canada here. I'm in Pennsylvania. It's cold in both places.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. Well, I want to get right into it. I got so many questions for you. But right off the bat, what I'm really curious about is, as a emergency medicine doctor, with also, your faith in God, with a Greek Orthodox background, how has your faith shaped the way you approach your work in medicine? Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's a huge aspect of what I bring. In one way, it helps me navigate some tough scenarios. In the emergency department, we take care of everything and anything that comes through the doors. I mean, it's 24/7 work. I work shifts right now that are about 12 hours, but they can be overnight, holidays, weekends. And I can tell you, struggle and tragedy and sorrow occur 24 hours a day. And I always like to say that the miracle is not that Western medicine has figured out a way to solve a lot of this. The miracle is that we don't all die 100 different ways every day. We really have a lot to be grateful for. And I remember a story actually once. I was at a conference and there was this lady giving a very excited talk about her seeing God and Jesus. And she was in this tough relationship where she was getting abused and assaulted and really had a tough life, but she made it out of it. But she attributed a lot of it to her connection with God. And she had this vision of seeing him. And, she spoke about it very, very in great detail and this one-on-one connection. I have to tell you, as much as I consider myself a Christian, I'm Greek Orthodox of the many denominations, but I'm a Greek Orthodox Christian. I was baptized in the faith as an infant. I've been fasting since I was 7. I go to church. It's a very important part of my life. But I have never been blessed to have a vision of God. Okay. I've never seen him. I can't tell you what his color looks like, how long his beard is. And when I left this conference, I remember thinking to myself, you know what, God? I'm a little jealous. Here's this lady talking about her interaction with you and the speech she's had and the conversations. And I just thought about that for a while. And I just felt kind of down, like, where's my connection? And I had this epiphany moment, maybe an hour later. I was like, wait, I've never had her problems. I've never been assaulted. I've never been addicted to drugs. I've never been, thrown down and cast down in the ways that she described. And I realized, prevention is a beautiful thing. I mean, it'd be very nice to kind of go through all of hell and see God at the end of it, but it's also kind of nice not to go through hell. And so in some ways, you got to be careful what you pray for, because in some way, and I think historically too, Solomon and David, they didn't like spend, hours talking to God. In fact, I think their one-on-one interactions were pretty limited, but, I don't consider myself to be Prophet David or King Solomon. But in any case, I am very grateful. I am very grateful for the things that I've never experienced and for the things that I've never had to be saved from. And I think that we need to be aware of that, that sometimes the greatest miracle are the things that we don't have to react to. So as an emergency medicine doctor, first and foremost, I go into every shift feeling very grateful, because there are a lot of things that go on every hour of the day that I've never personally experienced. Now, I'm responsible. It's a tough spot. You hear about people who might see something, they see a car accident and they get disturbed. Maybe they had the opportunity to go do something, perhaps to help a person that was in a tough moment. But it's a whole nother thing to actually be responsible, and maybe so responsible that if you get it wrong, you might actually be written up. You might actually be sued. You might actually be put in front of a morbidity and mortality committee to say, hey, what did you do wrong, Dr. Pete, in this case? And that's a lot of pressure. But I will say that the Christian faith that I hold and I recognize through all my marches, through my shifts, it's very consoling. And certainly there are scenarios when it comes to end-of-life care where you just know that things are futile. You have to be able to reference something other than an algorithm, to make sense of it all. Never mind the fact that when the dust settles and you go home to sleep for the night, do you feel at peace about things? You struggle with it. I've had to take care of kids that were sadly assaulted and killed by their own parents. I've had to take care of stroke victims and heart attacks, of people that were way too young to die, or those that had breast cancer. And were in their last hours, that maybe there wasn't someone at bedside to be with them. And so there's a lot of beautiful moments, honestly, even amidst that tragedy. But I think what sustains me through all of that is my Christian background and belief. And it's to salve the suffering. And we'll talk about fasting is the ultimate preventative tool given by God. But certainly my Christian belief informs me every hour of my shift and really in my life.
That's incredible. I was getting goosebumps there as you were sharing some of those things. Was there a particular moment when your Christian faith really directly influenced a medical decision that you made when treating someone?
That I was telling you before, I never really got to speak to God, but I do think that people speak through my patients. How do these Christian beliefs kind of aid me in the moment? Are there any case studies for that? I mean, one quick story essentially is there was like an 18-month-old toddler, or that was dying from a terrible congenital abnormality. He had Down syndrome, and sadly, his parents dropped him off basically in an ICU, and he spent pretty much those 18 months in an ICU. He never left the hospital. And was also sad about that, his parents didn't come to visit him. In fact, at some point, the nurses and staff there probably knew more about this child day to day than the family did. And it just so happened that as I was switching over to completing this rotation at this pediatric ICU, that it was very clear to us that this child was going to die. He was on some equipment called high flow that literally poured 50 liters of oxygen in through his nose and his mouth to help him get oxygen to the rest of his body. And that was failing him. So if you can imagine,
Wow.
That's a tremendous amount of oxygen. So we knew that it was futile. We knew that family wasn't going to come. And I knew that this child was not going to get any religious moment in his life. So what can you do? I had 4 kids at the time. I still have 4 kids, but they were all very young. And so what I did is what any Christian father does. And I just essentially chanted or sang a song for that child in his last moments. And it's funny, because it's a very simple song, and it was a sweet song. But I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many nurses came up to me afterwards and just said how special that moment was. And the reality is that if I hadn't been a Christian, if I hadn't had then maybe some traditions that had been taught me, like, what would I have done in that moment? And what would I have done is what everyone else did, which is kind of just watch and wait. And so we put this child to sleep, and he had the hymn itself was called "Of Thy Mystic Supper." Interestingly, we sing that right before we have communion, which is the very end of liturgy, sort of the pinnacle moment, but speaks about preparing your soul and asking God to allow you to receive communion, essentially salvation. But that was the last hymn that this child ever heard before he was put to sleep. But you can also imagine, too, you're trying to make sense of that moment and why his parents weren't there, and it's very easy to become judgmental. But that was certainly a moment that helped me.